Unfortunately, there are a ton of myths about childbirth and the period after childbirth, your postpartum period, that are pretty misguided. So I'm gonna bust them. All right, first off, there's the myth that everything will go as planned if you just prepare enough. So I'm a huge proponent of preparation, of making birth preferences, because I feel that this helps you be more informed about childbirth and more empowered, and it definitely sets you up for a more positive experience. But with that said, it's almost guaranteed that at least certain aspects of your path through birth will veer off the path that you expected to walk. So expect the unexpected. Know that your preparation, especially the relaxation tools, will serve you beautifully, and just trust that you are going to have the birth experience you're meant to have, even if it doesn't initially make sense, even if you're kind of bummed out about certain changes or interventions that might be needed. You'll have the birth that you're meant to have. And I kind of equate it to an actor a bit. You know, they pour in preparation when they are setting up for a role, and then when they're on stage performing or they're in front of the camera, they just let the preparation go. They don't overanalyze it. They just allow themselves to be in the moment, and they allow their instincts to guide them. So birth is pretty similar. You know, fill your pregnancy with preparation, with information, with figuring out how to tune into your instincts, and then trust that those instincts, informed by all that information that you gathered, will guide you through the birth path that might be a bit unpredictable. Okay, next, there is the myth that you'll die. So of course, I mean, we never know when we're gonna go, right? So I can never say that there's a guarantee that that won't happen, but this is no longer really a legitimate, serious fear that women need to have going into birth. So this fear of death was created long ago when, sadly, women did not have access to a lot of the amazing medical supports that we have now. So back then, even a minor complication could lead to the mother passing away. But now, if you have a trained, medical professional, a doctor, a midwife present at your birth, they are incredibly equipped to keep you safe regardless of the complications that come up. So again, if you have a trained professional with you that's able to look out for certain signs that might indicate that you need additional support, you're going to be okay. And so you can release that fear of death. I know it's a big one. I know there's a lot of layers to it, but again, it's no longer something that should be a primary fear in the minds of pregnant women. Okay, and so with the next one, while I definitely feel that, if you get a care provider that you feel like you can trust, you're going to have a good experience. But with that said, they're not infallible. So don't think that you have to say yes to each and everything that your care provider recommends. I do think that you should have a conversation with them. I don't think you should just say, no, I don't feel like it, I'm not going to do that. I think you should ask a lot of questions, say, why are you recommending this? Let's really talk about it. Let's look at the options. Make the decision together. Don't just think that, again, because they're the trained professional, that you need to say yes to everything they recommend, even if it goes against your instincts. So ask a lot of questions and make sure that the two of you are making the decision together. All right. Okay, so the next myth is that birth will make you scream at your partner and cuss at them. That is not always the case. Sure, your patience and your filter might drop a bit during birth, which is totally fine. You should feel safe to do or say whatever you want during birth. But with that said, a lot of times the birthing experience is a really beautiful bonding opportunity for the woman and her partner. They're going through this amazing transition together, and yeah, it can be really amazing and help you come together versus go head to head. Okay, and so the next myth is that every mom is immediately connected to their baby. They immediately fall in love. Sometimes that's not the case, and that is okay. Some women freak out if they don't immediately feel that love they were told they should be feeling, and that, could lead to postpartum blues or depression. Know that, even though your baby's been growing within you, they're still somewhat a stranger. You don't really know them. You don't know what they like, what they don't like. So you're gonna have to go through a getting to know you period, and that love and that connection will slowly build. And of course, if you really feel blue, definitely seek support, but don't be too hard on yourself if you don't immediately have those like hearts floating around your head. It'll come. Okay, next myth. Your body could grow a baby that's too big for it. So the big baby myth is a big one. Like, oh, baby's too big, we gotta do a cesarean. While there are plenty of circumstances that make a cesarean birth an amazing option, personally, I don't think that the big baby one is really relevant, because I'm a true believer in your body only growing a baby that can fit through your pelvis. I have been at the births of babies that were over 10 pounds and their moms were like tiny, itty bitty waist, really small, and they had a vaginal birth. Not to say that happens every time, but I really believe that your body is not going to grow a baby that's too big to fit out of it. Okay, so the next myth, you have to lie down with your back in the bed and your feet up in stirrups. For some women, that position feels great and they can push against the stirrups and that gives them lots of power. But for other women, laying on their back is one of the most uncomfortable positions as they're having contractions, and it can be actually harder for them to push in that position. So if you're on your back with your feet up in the stirrups and you just feel like it's not working, you can't figure out like how to push, if you don't have an epidural, ask if you can try squatting, laying on your side with somebody holding up your upper leg, or sitting on a birthing stool. Birthing stool is a really great way to get down into a low squat without exerting your legs much. So don't think that just because, a doctor tells you, all right, time for the stirrups, you don't have to get in there. You can play around with different positions. Okay, so the next one, you'll definitely get an epidural. I've had so many moms who are prepping for an unmedicated birth have people say, oh, forget about it, you're gonna ask for an epidural. And I can't stand when people say that, because while having an epidural is a totally fine choice and it works amazing for some women, I personally had an unmedicated birth. It was not easy, but I didn't need the epidural. I've been at plenty of other births where the woman prepped and she didn't need an epidural. So do not think that just because childbirth is a really intense experience that it's a foregone conclusion that you'll get an epidural. It absolutely isn't. But again, if you prep for an unmedicated birth and you do decide to get an epidural, that is also completely fine. You should not feel any shame for that, and you should not accept any judgment for that. To each her own. Okay. The next myth is that home births aren't safe. I have been at tons of amazing, beautiful home births, but the key with a safe home birth is that a trained midwife is present. I'm not necessarily a proponent of home births that don't have a trained medical professional there, and midwives are incredibly trained. And part of their training, a key part of their training, is looking out for signs that a mom needs to be transferred to the hospital. And number one, home birth midwives don't really take on high-risk moms. They're pretty conservative with that. And if you do have certain risk factors that would make it safer for you to be in the hospital, they're gonna tell you that. But if you're having your home birth and something comes up, they're likely going to transfer you to the hospital well before you're in an emergency situation. And another thing is, some women feel safer being at home because they feel that there's a they have less of a risk of developing an infection when they're at home versus at the hospital. So if you're thinking about a home birth, but people are scaring you off by saying it's so unsafe, I really recommend that you meet with a few midwives and talk to them, ask about their experiences, and that will likely boost your confidence about a home birth if that's what feels right to you. If you feel like, oh, I like the idea of a home birth, but I think I'd really feel safer in a hospital. If that's the case, go to the hospital. Do whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. Okay, the next myth. Your water will gush out of you like you see in the movies, and it'll be so dramatic, and that'll be your first sign of labor. Usually that's not the case. Usually when your membranes rupture or your water breaks, it's more like a slow trickle. It kind of feels like you're peeing yourself. And usually this doesn't happen until you are well into active labor, going through transition, or sometimes a baby is born in caul, which means the water never breaks, and the baby is born still encapsulated in the sac, which is a really beautiful, gentle way to be birthed. So don't necessarily expect that gush. And if you start thinking, oh wow, I'm like peeing without even trying to pee, I wonder what that is, it's probably your water breaking. Okay, and so finally, the final myth is that a C-section is easier than a vaginal birth. This isn't necessarily true. It might be true on the front end. Of course, when the baby is actually emerging during a cesarean birth, you're numb down there and you can't feel it, even though mentally it can be somewhat intense for women, especially if you have some fears of the hospital. But a cesarean, a C-section is a really major surgery, and after you have it, there is usually quite a bit of discomfort. It's a really long recovery period, much longer than you have to go through with a vaginal birth. So just know that, a cesarean birth isn't bad. There's plenty of circumstances that make it a really wonderful option for women. But if you don't need one, I would recommend really considering a vaginal birth. If there are any other myths that you've heard that you want to be busted, go ahead and tell me about them in the comments below.